Bine v-am regăsit la EuroDictionar. Va fi o ediție aparte, o ediție specială, o ediție în care vom încerca să obținem o opinie cu adevărat autorizată și absolut neutră în raport cu ceea ce se întâmplă în Republica Moldova. Neutră în sensul în care opinia vine de la o persoană care nu este implicată politic, care nici nu va fi implicată politic, care însă reprezintă o instituție de importanță mondială care, pe mai multe paliere de activitate, oferă asistență Republicii Moldova. Este vorba despre Organizația Națiunilor Unite, despre coordonatorul rezident al acestei organizații, care în egală măsură este și reprezentant permanent al Programului Națiunilor Unite pentru Dezvoltare în Republica Moldova, doamna Dafina Gherceva. Este o persoană cu adevărat importantă, pentru că prin mâinile și experiența domniei sale trec toate programele de asistență pentru dezvoltare pe care Națiunile Unite le are în derulare pentru Republica Moldova. Pe scurt, asta înseamnă finanțări, respectiv consiliere pe capitole cu adevărat importante. Acum, pe ce capitole, în ce fel se produce toată această asistență și mai ales ce așteptări și standarde există în raport cu Republica Moldova, acestea sunt chestiunile pe care va trebui să le aflăm și pe care cred că e important să le știți, pentru că fiecare cetățean al Moldovei își dorește, și auzim asta de o bucată de vreme încoace, o viață mai bună. Ce înseamnă însă o viață mai bună și mai ales care sunt standardele minim necesare pentru asta? Vom încerca să aflăm. Dialogul va continua în engleză. Îmi pare rău, eu nu vorbesc limba rusă, doamna Gherceva o vorbește, poate că ar fi fost mai simplu pentru o parte a publicului, dar sper totuși că engleza subtitrată în română va fi în regulă. Mrs. Gherceva, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
In my introduction, I've been telling the public that you actually coordinate those kind of programs which the United Nations develop in the Republic of Moldova in order to help Moldova develop itself. Could you please explain us which are the main targets and the main goals that the UN and the UNDP has here? What actually do you focus on?
UN system has a long-lasting presence in Moldova, and actually this year we'll be celebrating the 23rd anniversary since the Office of the United Nations system was opened in Moldova, and this nicely also coincides with the 17th anniversary of the UN. As you know, UN was born on the 24th of October in 1945, and this year is marking 70 years of existence. A UN system in Moldova is benefiting from a very strategic partnership with the government, civil society, private sector, but also other development partners. And in 2012, the government of Moldova has requested UN family to adopt the so-called delivering as one approach and act as one. This has been received very well by the system, by agencies, programs and funds, and in the current partnership framework, which has been jointly developed with the government of Moldova, we are basically implementing this approach, which means that we have one program, one budgetary framework, we operate as one, we communicate as one, and we have one leader. The ongoing United Nations partnership framework is focusing on three key priority areas. The first one is about further enhancement and promotion of liberal and functional democracy, including support to justice sector reform and also promotion of human rights for all. The second pillar, or the second priority area, is about further advancement of human development, improving living standards, fighting poverty, bridging disparities, regional inequalities, and also improving the quality, accessibility, and affordability of public services. The third pillar is related to sustainable development, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, promoting energy efficiency, promoting the use of renewable energy sources, and also strengthening national capacity for disaster risk reduction. So far, a number of tangible and noticeable results have been achieved. We have done this year a midterm review, and I'm very happy to share with you the fact that we are very satisfied with the progress made, and this progress has been made thanks again to the strategic partnership which we enjoy with a number of key stakeholders.
Well, everything seems so very broad on one hand, and on the other hand, so very optimistic. But in the meantime, Moldova seems to be struggling again with some unrest, social unrest, with political implications. By the time we record this program, to the time that we will broadcast it, things might change, situations might be complicated, or on the other hand, might get even more simplified. Under these circumstances, which is your assessment about the stability and predictability of the Moldavian institutions, which are your partners? It could be difficult to deal with a country that would direct itself maybe to another crisis, political crisis.
Well, you're right that the events are evolving very rapidly, and the challenges which Moldova is facing are very complex. They're interrelated and generate negative feedback loops, which in turn increase the speed and unpredictability of events. I would like to stress the fact that what is of critical importance for building and maintaining liberal and functional democracy is to have strong political will for reforms. In the case of Moldova, this is about justice sector reform, public administration reform, decentralization. The second critical precondition is to have strong sense of identity and consensus around a common and shared vision, and also to address one of the challenges which the country is facing, deep divide in the society and lack of social cohesion. And last but not least, in order for Moldova to modernize itself and to become an example of functional and liberal democracy, we need responsive institutions with strong national capacity. Many of these conditions, unfortunately, currently are not in place, and therefore development partners are working closely with, not only with the executive branch of power, but with the other two, with the legislative and with the judiciary, in order to make sure these conditions are put in place. What is going on currently is a demonstration of the growing level of dissatisfaction in society with the current development discourse. And we know, and this is not a secret, that political instability is posing serious risk on the overall national security. We are aware of the banking and financial crisis. So all these challenges, unless swiftly and smoothly addressed, could unfortunately reverse some of the very positive trends which have been observed lately, and in particular I'm referring to the significant achievements made by Moldova as far as the Millennium Development Goals are concerned, and the fact that goal number 1, poverty eradication, has been achieved of Moldova. But now what we are observing, not only challenges which are generated by internal trends, but also external challenges such as the war in Ukraine, the increasing geopolitical instability, are impacting the internal developments, and this is something which has to be factored into the discussions, decision-making processes, programming, and interventions.
You have nominated some very important points, fields in which Moldova should really change, such as justice or social lack of cohesion. I would like to ask you to address specifically to one or two or three of these points which you consider to be critical for the Moldavian society. For example, justice. What is to be done? What could the UN do in order to help support significant changes into the justice system? Establishing
an independent justice sector which is acting with a clear understanding that no one should be treated with a special approach, and there should be no tolerance as far as corruption is concerned, is something of critical importance. Having such a sector which is making sure that all the citizens are given equal rights and opportunities will significantly increase the level of trust in the political elite by the society. We know that one of the key reforms is the reform of the prosecutor's office, and there is a need for a new law which has passed first hearing and is due to be shortly approved, but so far has not yet been approved. So this is something which is very important because, unfortunately, Moldova is a country where we are observing systemic and endemic corruption. And this corruption is both so-called petty cash corruption when it comes to small bribes and presents for favorable attitude towards children or other type of examples, and also corruption which involves so-called chronic capitalism, the symbiosis between private sector and politicians, between oligarchs and politicians. So this is an issue which is of concern to everybody. And I remember when development partners had one-day retreat with the previous government, we discussed the recommendations which development partners have provided in a so-called briefing book, one of which was to decisively curb corruption and coordinate efforts towards addressing this issue, because when you have such a phenomenon or such a challenge, this ultimately means that many people are deprived from their rights and opportunities, and the ultimate result is country is not developing and the way it should be. It cannot be modernized, and the level of human development is continuously deteriorating. So there is a need for concerted, collective and focused efforts to address this issue, and UN, together with other development partners, is working towards this end. And we have a number of projects which are providing support to the Anti-Corruption Commission. We are working with the Parliament, making sure that the level of transparency in the way they're making decisions, they're voting, they're exercising their oversight function is continuously increasing. And also we work at the local level with municipalities, with local communities, trying to raise their awareness of the fact that when it comes to corruption, this is a two-way process. One is giving and someone is receiving. So instead of only naming and blaming, people should look at themselves and see if their behavior is also free of corruption.
You have anticipated my question, because exactly, it's a two-way process. And there is a kind of hypocrisy that can be noticed in the society. On one hand, they go out in the square, for example, justified by the low level of life in the society on one hand, but on the other hand, the population itself contributes to this petty corruption mainly, but also somehow transforming it into endemic corruption. What's to be done here? Are the programs coordinated, for example, by the United Nations in order to bring this to light and help the population to change its own mentality? You just can't simply blame someone else and with one hand, and on the other hand keep giving him and supporting him in his corruption.
Absolutely, and yes, we do have one very interesting project which we are jointly implementing with the Ministry of Education. And it is about raising awareness of kids in school about corruption, or rather how they can fight corruption. And interesting manual has been developed whereby kids themselves, students themselves, have come up with a set of actions leading to curbing corruption, petty corruption in the school system, like what they should do in order to avoid favorism, what they should do in order to avoid giving presents to teachers, who in turn will favor one or the other student instead of providing the same service and attention to everybody in the class. And this is something which has come from them. I mean, we did not impose on them different behavior changes, but we facilitated this discussion, and they came up with interesting ideas on how this petty corruption in the educational system can be curbed and avoided.
Let's just hope that results will be seen, not only by the change of generations, because it's quite a long time to wait for the children in school to get to count in the society. I would place the discussion now in that part in which you were referring to this absolutely dramatic lack of cohesion in the society. This is to be noticed indeed. Several splits, ethnic split, social split, political and ideological split. Which is your assessment upon that? How complicated is this? Which is the risk of this kind of situation inflicting upon Moldova?
Well, this is a very serious challenge because the dividing lines, as you have rightly said, are not only ethnic or linguistic or political. They are also economic. They are also geographic. And overall, the population of Moldova is about 3 million and 2 or 5. But this small country is deeply divided. And this deep division impedes the possibility of society to leverage its collective energy and support already very difficult and complex reform agenda. When you don't have this unity around a common vision, when you don't have a sense of identity, it is very difficult to overcome the pain and the high price of the reform for better future. And this is the reason why many people who are saying we are fed up by the corruption, by lack of stability, by low living standards, and we are leaving the country. Some are going west, some are going east, and this poses a huge threat to national capital. Moldova, unfortunately, doesn't have rich natural resources or other means to promote growth. So the only strong capital are the people, but the people are leaving the country. And this is something which is very worrisome. And unless efforts are made to revert this trend, who knows what the future will bring to us. In the past couple of years, we know that the economic growth was relatively high and stable, and there were many reasons, including remittances. But now, with the slowdown of economies in Russia and Ukraine, with the trade shocks, with the currency shocks, remittances have dwindled. And this has immediately impacted the living standards of the population. So what they can do, they just leave the country. And then this is really worrisome. It's worrisome because it can be easily depopulated. And now we see the huge regional disparities and this dichotomy between urban and rural areas. Everybody is trying to come to Chisinau or Balts because these are the hubs of economic growth, and these are cities where you can find a decent job. And rural areas are left underdeveloped. And Moldova is known by its fertile soil, by very conducive conditions for agricultural development. But if there are no people in the rural areas to do agriculture, then how we can benefit from these opportunities? So this is an issue, and I believe it's well understood, but so far we don't see any meaningful action towards addressing it.
Why? What's missing? Why? It is true. Why there is no direct action? Lack of political knowledge, lack of political wish, or what's happening actually?
The knowledge is there, the recognition is there. I would say two things are missing: lack of political will to act and lack of meaningful dialogue with the society. Civil society doesn't have the platform which would enable it to make its voice heard. Voice and accountability mechanisms are not in place, and therefore those who are managing public affairs do not necessarily make an effort to hear what their constituency would like to tell them. And this lack of dialogue between the society on one hand and the state is something which impedes the efforts towards enhancing and increasing the level of social cohesion. Another element or challenge is lack of interest to bring young people on board. Young people are full with new ideas, they are full with energy, and they really would like, many of them have told me, we don't want to leave the country, we want to stay here and we want to contribute to our country's development, but we are not given the opportunity. Sometimes this could be perceived as, well, this is a very passive attitude. Instead of you waiting for somebody to give you the opportunity, why don't you try and reap it? So it's, again, two-way process, but in order for them to be engaged and involved into country's development, they need to be made aware of how much they can contribute. And this is also something that is lacking. Rising awareness, sensitization, engagement is what needs to happen.
On one hand, it's perfectly true. On the other hand, I'm simply wondering how could, for example, the political environment be stimulated, forced maybe, to take some action, because people have to understand that something has to be done, but only in terms of law, for example.
Oh, yeah.
What exactly could be done? Because this is the question in everyone's mind. What should we do? We go out, we shout, but we don't have a civil platform to represent ourselves. Politicians themselves seem to be deaf, dumb, they don't dialogue. So what's to be done effectively, practically? There is the experience of Bulgaria you come from, there is the experience of the neighboring Romania, both countries which belong to the Eastern Bloc but now have significantly changed.
If I look at the experience of my own country, and you have also rightly mentioned Romania, these two countries are coming from the same background, if you will, as Moldova, though Moldova was not an independent country. It was a republic within the framework of the Soviet Union, while Bulgaria and Romania were independent countries. Still, we are coming from this same background. So, in the case of Bulgaria, the reform agenda was also very heavily politically charged, and the transition process was long, very painful, with a very high social price. What helped us to make this sort of jump and really make a decisive efforts towards establishing market economy and liberal democracy is the accession to the European Union. We have received, like the other new Euro member states, we have received a lot of financial support, but we also had to adhere to a number of requirements. So when we started the process, we knew we have to implement each and every step on the way towards EU accession. So this policy of carrot and stick was very useful, because often politicians were trying to justify difficult reforms by saying, well, this is what EU wants us to do. But this was not only the EU which wanted us to do this. This was in the interest of Bulgaria. And like in Moldova, one of the most difficult elements of the comprehensive and profound reform is fight against corruption and justice sector reform. And you may have heard that a couple of days ago, unfortunately, the law on fighting corruption in Bulgaria did not pass its first hearing. And this was a huge disappointment, because everybody is saying, yes, we are for establishing transparent division of power, for establishing functional and liberal democracy, but they don't walk the talk. And therefore, the pressure which comes from the society in a very civilized manner is something which is very important. In the case of Moldova, the politicians know what needs to be done. Political parties know what is requested, not only by development partners, but by their fellow citizens. So it's not about not knowing, it's about getting their act together and delivering.
Well, this is practically an apparent, or maybe a true dilemma. The difference between walking and talking. How could it be overcome in Moldova? How does your institution actually try to push the things? Because it's obvious that everyone knows what's to be done, but for some reasons, everything is delayed. On the other hand, the population has already been told you need to accept pain and sacrifice in order to get to progress and welfare. But how could the population be convinced to accept this as long as it is deceived on one hand and slightly hypocrite on the other hand? How is this dilemma to be overcome?
Well, as far as I know, and following the recent developments, one of the key triggers for the protest is the banking crisis. So people are really fed up and frustrated by the fact that in small Moldova, $1 billion have disappeared just like that. So they really want those who have committed this crime to be held accountable, by the respective structures and institutions. And only when they see some concrete actions towards addressing this this issue, this crisis, they will be able to change the way they express their dissatisfaction and come up with constructive proposals for how to take forward the reform agenda. Implementing this comprehensive reform is a collective effort. It is not only the state with the three branches, it is also the other two key stakeholders, civil society and the private sector. So necessary checks and balances mechanisms have to be put in place in order for the civil society to hold the politicians accountable, but at the same time to contribute, because this is not something which only the government or the state is responsible for. And citizens should not sit aside and observe. They have to be engaged. They have to participate. But in order for them to meaningfully do so, they need to have a high level of trust in the politicians, in the political class. So far, this is missing.
At the beginning of our conversation, you have said that results have been achieved so far, and somehow you are satisfied by the results already been achieved in some fields of activity. On the other hand, you, as if I'm not mistaken, you have been appointed here in February this year.
Yes.
A time short enough to get accustomed, but long enough to be the witness of some very complicated situations. Are you confident under these circumstances that Moldova is on the good path? Is this the good path for the good future of Moldova, or significant changes have to be done in a short while, in a short time, in a short period?
No doubt changes are needed. And the key is to accelerate the reforms. I mean, this is something which no one is questioning. The status quo is no go. There is no way the country could continue in the same way of political instability and deepening socioeconomic inequalities. This status quo has to be changed. And we all know what needs to be done. When the country signed the association agreement and when this agreement was ratified, Moldova is the first country within the framework of the 5 Eastern Neighborhood countries, Eastern Partnership countries, which is benefiting from the free visa regime. So there is so many opportunities which the country and its citizens can reap, provided certain set of reforms are implemented. So going as it has been the case over the past couple of months ahead is not an option. Changes are absolutely necessary.
Changes by any means? Because, you know, that there is a strong division between East and West, Eastern and Western vector population is divided. Is there any risk in the fact that some would prefer radical changes such as preliminary elections, significant changes in the constitution regarding the role of the president, for example, resignation of the president? All sorts of radical measures have been waived in the public space.
UN, as you know, is an intergovernmental organization, and what makes us a trusted partner is our impartiality. Our ultimate objective in our program countries where we have a physical presence is to promote sustainable human development. Sustainable human development doesn't have a color per se. It does not support right or left vector. It does not support, for example, in the case of Moldova, moving closer to Europe or moving closer to Russia. Our ultimate objective is to ensure that people have access to education, high quality health services, they have decent jobs, and they live in clean environment. So in this regard, when I spoke about the need for profound change, I meant change using democratic rules and procedures. Further exacerbating the instability is not an option. So therefore, I believe politicians will opt for a smart way to address the demands of the citizens, while at the same time, in a very constitutional and democratic way, they introduce the changes required and implement the reforms.
We are getting closer to the end of this discussion. I would like you to emphasize which would be your institution's main goals for a medium term, for example, in the Republic of Moldova. Which is the main interest of the United Nations right now in Moldova?
As I've already mentioned, we have 3 key pillars in our ongoing program, and this year marks extremely important moment in the development of the humanity, so to speak. This year, 3 key development milestones are due to be approved. Already, the disaster risk reduction agenda has been approved in March in Sedai, Japan. In a couple of days, we expect the UN General Assembly to approve the Sustainable Development Goals, which will define the development of the humanity over the next 15 years, and hopefully in December in Paris we will have a new climate change accord. So when we try to translate this global agenda into the local context of Moldova, for us a key preoccupation will be the translation, or rather the localization of the Sustainable Development Goals into the country's national, regional and local planning and budgeting processes. In order for us to do so, we obviously need to further enhance democracy and promote the reform agenda.
Thank you very much. We indeed came to the end of our discussion. Am ajuns la sfârșit, într-adevăr. Îi mulțumesc doamnei Dafina Gherceva pentru prezența în emisiunea noastră, pentru atenție. Nu au fost vorbe lipsite de sens. Încercați să înțelegeți că și schimbarea mentalității noastre este necesară pentru a schimba contextul general. A rămâne pe margine observator nu ajută la nimic. Până data viitoare, numai bine!